In the early decades of the 20th century, the infantryman's world was ruled by the bolt-action rifle. From the muddy trenches of the First World War to the uneasy peace that followed, soldiers were trained to fire, cycle the bolt, reacquire the target, and fire again. It was a rhythm as mechanical as the weapons themselves. The German Karabiner 98K, the British Lee Enfield, the Russian Mosin Nagant, all were accurate, rugged, and deadly. But they shared the same limitation. Each shot required a manual action before the next could be fired. Military planners believed discipline and marksmanship mattered more than speed. Ammunition conservation was doctrine. A soldier who fired too quickly risked running dry at the wrong moment. But as technology advanced between the wars, one question refused to disappear. What if the standard infantry rifle could fire as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger? In the United States, that question found its answer in the quiet persistence of a Canadian-born machinist named John Garand. Born in Quebec and raised in New England textile towns, Garand had little formal education. What he possessed instead was mechanical instinct. Machines made sense to him. Steel, springs, pressure, timing. He understood how they could work together. By the 1920s, the U.S. Army was searching for a semi-automatic replacement for the aging M1903 Springfield. Several designs were tested and rejected. Early prototypes jammed. Others were too delicate for battlefield dirt and mud. A self-loading rifle had to survive sand, rain, neglect, and panic. It had to be simple enough for a farm boy from Kansas to maintain under fire. Garand's breakthrough came with a gas-operated system that harnessed expanding propellant gases from a fired round to cycle the action automatically. When a bullet traveled down the barrel, a portion of the gas was diverted through a small port, driving a piston that pushed the bolt rearward. The spent casing was ejected, a fresh cartridge was chambered, the rifle reset itself for the next shot. It worked. Not perfectly at first. There were refinements, caliber changes, durability tests, but it worked well enough that in 1936, the United States officially adopted the U.S. rifle caliber .30 M1. The world barely noticed. At the time, most nations dismissed semi-automatic rifles as expensive novelties. Germany continued refining its Mauser system. Britain relied on the fast-cycling but still manual Lee Enfield. The Soviet Union experimented but struggled with reliability at scale. Armies valued proven designs. Conservative thinking ruled procurement offices across Europe. The United States made a different bet. By the time America entered the Second World War in December 1941, American infantry units were increasingly equipped with the M1 Garand. An average trained rifleman could fire 40 to 50 aimed shots per minute. A bolt-action soldier, even highly skilled, might manage half that under combat conditions. The difference was not theoretical. During early fighting in North Africa and later in Italy, German troops encountered American infantry who seemed to possess an unusual volume of fire. Reports described U.S. units delivering rapid, repeated shots without the telltale pause of bolt manipulation. To a German soldier trained on the Karabiner 98K, it could feel as though every American rifleman carried something closer to a light machine gun. General George Patton would later call the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. It was not an offhand compliment. Patton understood momentum. He understood that warfare at the small unit level often hinged on seconds. Who could place more accurate fire on target first? The semi-automatic rifle changed squad dynamics. Instead of relying heavily on a single automatic weapon for suppressive fire, American squads could distribute firepower across nearly every rifleman. Defensive positions became harder to assault. Counterattacks gained shock value. In close engagements, hedgerows in Normandy, mountain ridges in Italy, dense forests, rapid follow-up shots could mean survival. But the Garand was not merely about speed. It was about confidence. Imagine a 19-year-old private landing on a hostile shore. The noise is overwhelming. Artillery thunders. Machine guns chatter. Training narrows to instinct. With a bolt-action rifle, every shot requires breaking cheek weld, lifting the bolt, driving it back and forward, reacquiring sight picture. Under stress, fine motor skills degrade, movements slow, mistakes happen. With the M1, the rifle cycles itself, the shooter remains on target. Recoil, reset, press. Recoil, reset, press. The rhythm becomes fluid. The weapon feels alive but controlled. Production numbers tell the rest of the story. American industry, once mobilized, produced over 5 million M1 Garands during the war. Factories operated around the clock, parts were standardized, tolerances were refined for mass output without sacrificing reliability. This was not craftsmanship in the old European sense, it was industrial scale married to smart design. Other nations would experiment with semi-automatic service rifles during the war. Germany introduced the Gewehr 43A in limited numbers. The Soviet Union fielded the SVT-40 but struggled with reliability in harsh conditions. None were produced or distributed with the consistency of the American effort. By 1944, when Allied forces landed in Normandy, the semi-automatic rifle was no longer an experiment, it was standard issue. As American units pushed inland from the beaches, through bocage fields and shattered villages, the Garand proved its worth again and again. The revolution in infantry firepower did not announce itself with fanfare. It revealed itself in firefights won, in positions held, in attacks repelled. It revealed itself in after-action reports noting unexpected resistance, unexpected intensity of fire, observations written by opponents trying to understand what had changed. What had changed was simple and profound. The average American rifleman now possessed a weapon that multiplied his effectiveness without increasing his burden. He did not carry more ammunition than his enemy. He did not march faster. But when the moment came to fire, he could place more rounds downrange more quickly with fewer interruptions. And in modern war, that difference, measured in fractions of seconds and extra shots, could alter outcomes far beyond the view of a single soldier. The M1 Garand did not win the Second World War alone. No weapon does. But it shifted the balance at the level where wars are ultimately decided. The individual encounter between opposing infantrymen. Before the war, many believed the bolt-action rifle represented the pinnacle of battlefield practicality. After the war, that belief was gone. The age of the semi-automatic service rifle had begun.
If the first revolution of the M1 was speed, the second was how it was fed. At first glance, the feeding system of the M1 Garand looked unusual, even awkward. Instead of using a detachable box magazine like many modern rifles or simple stripper clips like traditional bolt actions, the rifle relied on a small metal device known as the en-bloc clip. 8 rounds of 30-06 ammunition were pressed into this clip as a single unit. The entire clip was then inserted into the rifle's internal magazine. It was not removed during firing. It stayed inside the rifle until the last round was fired. Then came the sound, a sharp metallic ping, as the empty clip was automatically ejected upward and out of the action. Critics seized on that sound almost immediately. In pre-war testing and early discussions, some officers questioned whether the noise would give away a soldier's position. Others argued that an 8-round capacity was limiting. Why not 10? Why not a detachable magazine that could be swapped out instantly? But to understand why the en-bloc clip existed, you have to return to the mind of John Garand. Garand was not designing for peacetime theory. He was designing for mass war. Detachable magazines are convenient, but they are also separate components. They can be lost, damaged, bent, or clogged. They require additional steel, additional springs, additional manufacturing steps. In the 1930s, producing millions of precision magazines to tight tolerances would have been expensive and time-consuming. Garand's solution was elegant in its simplicity. The M1's internal magazine was fixed inside the rifle. The en-bloc clip acted not as a magazine itself, but as a loading device that became part of the feeding system temporarily. When inserted, it locked into place. As each round was fired, the follower mechanism pushed the remaining cartridges upward. After the 8th and final shot, the follower rose fully, automatically triggering the ejection of the empty clip. No separate magazine to carry, no magazine to lose, no partial reloads to manage under stress, just 8 rounds fired in rhythm. Mechanically, the system worked in harmony with the rifle's gas operation. As expanding gases cycled the bolt, the next cartridge was stripped cleanly from the clip and chambered. The design reduced complexity in one critical way. Soldiers did not need to manage detachable components beyond the small stamped clips, which were cheap and easy to mass produce. During wartime production, American factories manufactured millions upon millions of these clips. They required far less material and machining time than detachable magazines would have. In an industrial war, that mattered. But what about the ping? The myth grew that enemy soldiers would wait for the metallic sound, knowing the American rifleman was momentarily empty and charge in that instant. Combat reality was far less dramatic. On a battlefield filled with artillery blasts, machine gun fire, shouted orders, ricochets, and explosions, the small metallic ring of an ejecting clip was rarely distinguishable beyond a short distance. Veterans from Normandy and the Pacific would later recall that they themselves often barely noticed it in the chaos. More importantly, the rifle did not become useless after the ping. A trained soldier could reload in seconds. A fresh clip was pressed down firmly into the receiver until it locked with a solid click. The bolt, either released manually or automatically, slammed forward and chambered around. The motion became muscle memory. There was another overlooked advantage: reliability. Mud, sand, carbon fouling, all were enemies of any firearm. The en-bloc system, seated within a solid internal magazine, proved remarkably durable. Unlike some early detachable magazine systems that suffered from feed lip damage or weak springs, the Garand's feeding geometry remained consistent shot after shot. German engineers would pursue semi-automatic designs of their own, such as the Gewehr 43, but these rifles used detachable magazines and were produced under increasing wartime strain. Late-war German manufacturing struggled with material shortages and quality control. The American system, by contrast, benefited from stable industrial capacity and standardization. And yet, despite its advantages, the en-bloc clip had a hidden consequence, one that would only become clear once American forces clashed directly with German troops across Europe. The rifle could not function without it. Unlike a bolt-action rifle that could single-load loose cartridges directly into the chamber, the M1's design required a clip to feed properly under normal operation. Without it, the rifle became awkward and inefficient. The clip was not optional, it was integral. For American soldiers, supplied by one of the most powerful logistical networks in history, this was not a problem. Ammunition arrived pre-packed in clips, sealed in bandoliers. Replacement clips were everywhere. The system was self-sustaining within U.S. supply chains. But outside that system, the story changed. Enemy forces who captured the rifle often found themselves holding a powerful weapon, but lacking that small stamped steel device that made it practical. Ammunition alone was not enough. The feeding mechanism depended on that precise 8-round unit. In design terms, this was efficiency. In battlefield terms, it created exclusivity. The feature critics mocked, the 8-round en-bloc clip with its distinctive metallic signature, was also the feature that tied the rifle tightly to American industry and logistics. It could not be easily absorbed into another army's supply system. It was not modular in the way later rifles would become. And that mattered. Because in total war, a weapon is never just steel and wood. It is supply lines, factories, doctrine, training, and infrastructure. The M1 Garand's feeding system was not simply a mechanical choice. It was an industrial strategy disguised as engineering. 8 rounds, 1 clip, 1 unmistakable sound. What some called a flaw was in truth part of a larger design philosophy. A rifle built not just to fire faster, but to belong entirely to the system that created it. And soon, on battlefields from Normandy to the Ardennes, that distinction would become impossible to ignore.
By 1943 and 1944, American and German forces were colliding across multiple fronts, in North Africa, in Italy, and soon in France. In every major conflict of the Second World War, soldiers scavenged weapons from the battlefield. A captured rifle could mean survival. Ammunition ran low. Units became separated from supply lines. In desperate moments, men used whatever worked. German troops were particularly skilled at reusing captured equipment. They designated foreign weapons with German nomenclature and issued them when practical. Soviet rifles, French artillery pieces, even Czech machine guns were absorbed into the Wehrmacht's logistical system. If it could fire and ammunition could be sourced, it could be used. But the American M1 Garand posed a unique problem. At first glance, it seemed like a prize, a semi-automatic rifle capable of delivering rapid, accurate fire. German soldiers, many armed with the bolt-action Karabiner 98K, immediately understood the advantage of not having to cycle a bolt after every shot. In close combat, the difference was obvious. Yet once captured, the rifle revealed its dependency. The first obstacle was ammunition. The M1 was chambered in .30-06 Springfield, a powerful American cartridge not standard within German supply chains. The Wehrmacht's primary rifle round was 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser. These cartridges were not interchangeable. Even if a German soldier found .30-06 ammunition on a battlefield, it was not something he could resupply through normal channels. But ammunition alone was not the decisive barrier. The true complication lay in the en-bloc clip. Without that small 8-round steel clip, the M1 Garand could not function properly. It was not designed to be comfortably single-loaded in combat conditions. While it was technically possible to insert a single cartridge and manually close the bolt, the process was slow, awkward, and tactically impractical. The rifle's internal geometry expected the clip to hold and guide cartridges under spring tension. Clips were expendable, but they were also specific. German logistics did not produce them. They were not stockpiled in depots. They were not compatible with other systems. If a German soldier captured a Garand but lacked spare clips, he was effectively holding a limited-use weapon. Imagine the scenario. A German infantryman in Normandy picks up a dropped M1 after a firefight. Perhaps there is a partially loaded clip inside. He fires those remaining rounds. The clip ejects with its metallic ring. Now the rifle is empty. Unless he has another compatible clip already loaded, the weapon becomes nearly useless in sustained combat. German doctrine emphasized supply discipline. Ammunition was distributed in standardized packaging. Weapons were maintained within established calibers to simplify logistics. Introducing a foreign semi-automatic rifle that required unique ammunition and feeding devices created complexity at a time when Germany's industrial system was already under immense strain. By late 1944, Allied bombing campaigns were severely disrupting German manufacturing and transport. Rail networks were damaged, fuel shortages were crippling mobility. Under such pressure, integrating a new rifle system was not realistic. There were limited attempts to catalog captured M1 rifles. Some were evaluated. Some may have been issued in small numbers to rear area units or for testing, but they never became a meaningful part of German infantry armament. Contrast this with the German approach to captured Soviet weapons. Large numbers of Mosin-Nagantau's rifles were reused because ammunition was abundant on the Eastern Front. Entire stocks of Czech arms were absorbed after occupation. These systems fit into logistical structures that Germany could support. The M1 did not. There was also the matter of maintenance. The Garand was reliable, but it was engineered with specific tolerances and parts. Replacement components were manufactured in American factories to precise specifications.
A broken extractor, a worn spring, or a damaged operating rod could not easily be replaced within German supply lines. Spare parts were not standardized across Wehrmacht depots. Every weapon in war exists within a web of support: ammunition production, spare parts manufacturing, training manuals, armorers, distribution systems. The M1 Garand's web was American, and that exclusivity had strategic consequences. The United States could equip millions of soldiers with a semi-automatic rifle because it possessed the industrial base to sustain that decision. The Garand was not simply a rifle, it was the visible endpoint of an enormous logistical machine. For German soldiers, capturing one was like capturing a fragment of that machine without access to the rest of it. There is irony in this reality. The very feature that critics questioned, the en-bloc clip system, became a kind of protective barrier. It prevented easy assimilation. It tied the weapon to its original supply chain. It ensured that the weapon's full potential remained in the hands of those who could sustain it. On the battlefield, a German soldier might briefly enjoy the rapid fire of a captured M1, but once those 8 rounds were gone, reality returned. Without clips, without steady ammunition resupply, without spare parts, the rifle was a temporary advantage at best. Meanwhile, American infantrymen moved forward with bandoliers filled with preloaded clips resupplied by trucks, ships, and factories operating thousands of miles away. Each clip represented not just 8 rounds, but an uninterrupted chain of production stretching back to American industry. In the end, warfare is not only about innovation, it is about sustainment. The German dilemma was not that they did not recognize the Garand's superiority, it was that they could not replicate or support it at scale. The rifle was advanced, yes, but more importantly, it was embedded within a logistical ecosystem that Germany could neither copy nor disrupt quickly enough. So the captured Garands remained curiosities, battlefield trophies, rather than transformative acquisitions. Powerful, impressive, but ultimately isolated. And as the war moved toward its final, brutal winter in the Ardennes, that imbalance in sustained firepower would once again prove decisive.
By the summer of 1944, the M1 Garand was no longer an experiment, it was standard issue. Millions had been produced. Hundreds of thousands were now in the hands of American soldiers preparing for one of the most decisive operations of the war, the invasion of Western Europe. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in Normandy. For the men landing under fire, the debate over semi-automatic rifles versus bolt-action designs was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, violent, and personal. As landing craft ramps dropped and soldiers waded through surf toward fortified positions, suppressive fire became the difference between movement and paralysis. German defenders, many armed with the reliable Karabiner 98K, delivered accurate fire from prepared emplacements. But American infantrymen could respond with rapid follow-up shots without shifting their firing grip. In chaotic, close-range combat, speed compounds advantage. A rifleman pinned behind a seawall could fire multiple aimed rounds in quick succession, keeping enemy heads down long enough for others to advance. That ability to sustain individual fire across an entire squad multiplied pressure on defenders. The Garand did not replace machine guns, it did something subtler. It narrowed the gap between standard riflemen and automatic weapons. Every American infantry squad carried the Browning automatic rifle, but now nearly every man could deliver semi-automatic fire at a pace that earlier generations would have associated with specialized weapons. As Allied forces pushed inland from the beaches into the hedgerows of Normandy, combat shifted into a maze of earthbanks and narrow fields. Visibility was limited, engagement distances were short, ambushes were common. In such terrain, reaction time mattered enormously.
A soldier stepping around a hedgerow corner might have only seconds to respond. With the M1, he could fire, adjust, and fire again without shifting his firing grip. The rhythm became instinctive. Veterans later described how the rifle seemed to stay on target, allowing them to maintain sight alignment through recoil and immediately press another shot. German troops noticed. Reports and post-war interviews reveal respect for the American rifle's rate of fire. Some initially believed U.S. units possessed more automatic weapons than they actually did. The psychological effect of repeated, fast, semi-automatic shots created the impression of greater numerical strength. The difference became even more pronounced during defensive actions. In December 1944, Germany launched a surprise counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, the opening phase of what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. In freezing conditions, under snow and fog, American units were caught off guard. Supply lines were disrupted, temperatures plummeted, weapons froze, men fought from foxholes carved into icy ground. In those brutal conditions, reliability mattered as much as firepower. The Garands' gas-operated system proved resilient in cold weather when properly maintained. Lubrication had to be adjusted for freezing temperatures, but when kept clean, the rifle continued to function effectively. Soldiers defending crossroads and villages relied on the ability to fire rapidly at advancing infantry. German assaults often depended on concentrated movement through forest cover, closing distance before overwhelming defenders. But when advancing troops emerged from tree lines, they encountered waves of semi-automatic rifle fire. Each American rifleman, firing 8 rounds in steady cadence before reloading, contributed to a wall of lead that slowed or broke momentum. The famous metallic ping still echoed after the 8th round, but in the roar of artillery and mortar fire, it was insignificant. What mattered was that a fresh clip could be inserted in seconds and the firing continued. In Bastogne and surrounding villages, surrounded American units held positions under immense pressure. Ammunition shortages did occur. No weapon eliminates the strain of logistics in encirclement. But when rounds were available, the Garand ensured they could be delivered quickly and effectively. The contrast with German infantry doctrine remained clear. The Wehrmacht relied heavily on the machine gun as the core of the squad, with riflemen supporting it. American doctrine distributed firepower more evenly. The M1 reinforced that structure. It allowed flexibility. If a machine gun was knocked out, riflemen still maintained significant suppressive capability. Beyond tactics, the rifle influenced morale. Confidence in equipment shapes how soldiers fight. When a man trusts that his rifle will fire each time he pulls the trigger, and that it will do so quickly, hesitation decreases, aggression increases. Small unit leaders could maneuver knowing their squads possessed consistent, dependable firepower. There were no perfect weapons in World War II. The M1 was heavy. Its 8-round capacity required frequent reloads in prolonged engagements. But in real combat conditions, beaches, forests, villages, its advantages repeatedly surfaced. By the war's final months in Europe, the pattern was unmistakable. American infantry units, broadly equipped with semi-automatic rifles, could generate a sustained rate of accurate fire unmatched by most opposing forces armed primarily with bolt-action designs. The Garand did not eliminate fear. It did not make men invulnerable, but it shifted probabilities. In a firefight measured in seconds, the ability to fire faster without sacrificing accuracy altered outcomes again and again. A suppressed enemy hesitates. A hesitating enemy loses initiative. And in modern war, initiative is often the dividing line between survival and defeat. From the shores of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the M1 Garand proved that its revolutionary design was not a laboratory achievement, it was a battlefield one. And as the war in Europe drew towards its end, the legacy of the rifle was already secured, not in theory, not in debate, but in the lived experience of the soldiers who carried it forward. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, millions of American soldiers returned home, carrying memories shaped in part by the rifle slung over their shoulders. The M1 Garand had marched across continents, from North Africa to Italy, from the hedgerows of France to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, and across vast stretches of the Pacific. It had done more than fire bullets. It had redefined what a standard infantry rifle could be. In the aftermath of the Second World War, military planners around the world studied lessons learned. One conclusion stood out clearly: the age of the bolt-action service rifle was ending. The war had demonstrated that semi-automatic firepower at the individual soldier level dramatically increased combat effectiveness. The M1 Garand was at the center of that realization. The man behind it, John Garand, did not seek celebrity. He remained a quiet engineer, known among professionals for his precision and persistence. But his design had altered military doctrine globally. Nations that once dismissed semi-automatic rifles as impractical were now racing to develop or refine their own. The rifle continued its service beyond World War II. During the Korean War, American troops once again relied on the M1 in brutal winter conditions, strikingly similar to those faced in the Ardennes. The rifle's durability and reliability once more proved critical. Yet warfare was evolving. By the 1950s, military thinkers were considering selective fire rifles, capable of both semi-automatic and automatic modes. The concept of intermediate cartridges began to take hold. Lighter ammunition meant soldiers could carry more rounds. Engagement distances were reassessed. Mobility became increasingly important. Eventually, the United States replaced the M1 with the M14, a rifle that retained some of the Garand's DNA while introducing a detachable magazine and selective fire capability. The transition reflected new strategic priorities, but it did not diminish the Garand's achievement. Instead, it underscored it. Every rifle that followed owed something to the foundation the M1 had laid. Its en-bloc clip system, once criticized, became recognized for what it truly was: a wartime optimization. It simplified manufacturing. It reduced logistical complexity within American supply chains. It prevented easy enemy reuse. It tied the rifle to an industrial ecosystem that supported it fully. What critics called a flaw had been, in context, a strength. The distinctive metallic ping became part of military folklore. Veterans remembered it vividly. Collectors would later demonstrate it with reverence, letting the empty clip eject into the air with that unmistakable sound, not as a weakness, but as a signature. In the civilian world, the Garand developed a second life. Surplus rifles were distributed through government programs, sold to qualified citizens for marksmanship and historical preservation. Shooting competitions featured them. Enthusiasts restored them and maintained them. The rifle became both artifact and functional history. There is something symbolic about its construction: wood and steel, mechanical and direct. It represents an era when industrial might and mechanical ingenuity combined under extraordinary pressure. More than 5 million were produced during World War II alone. Each one required coordinated labor: miners extracting ore, steelworkers forging components, machinists cutting precise tolerances, inspectors ensuring reliability, logisticians moving crates across oceans. The rifle embodied not just engineering, but national mobilization. Other nations would go on to produce iconic rifles of their own. The AK platform, the German G3, the Belgian FAL, all became symbols of their respective eras. But the Garand occupies a distinct place in history. It was the first semi-automatic rifle to be issued as the standard service rifle of a major power and deployed at massive scale in global war, and it proved the concept beyond doubt. Looking back, it is easy to focus on specifications: 8 rounds, .30-06 caliber, gas-operated action. But the rifle's true impact lies in how it changed expectations. Soldiers no longer accepted the pause between shots as inevitable. Commanders began to plan around increased individual firepower. Industrial planners recognized that manufacturing strategy could shape battlefield outcomes as decisively as tactics. The Garand taught a lesson that echoes into modern defense thinking. Technology alone is not enough. It must be producible at scale, supportable in the field, and integrated into doctrine. In that sense, the rifle was more than a weapon. It was a system, one that worked because design, industry, logistics, and training aligned. When General George S. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised, he was not claiming it was flawless. He was recognizing its timing. In the specific context of the Second World War, with America's industrial strength behind it, the M1 Garand delivered a decisive edge at the level of the individual infantryman. Wars are often remembered for sweeping strategies and towering leaders, but they are fought by individuals, by soldiers who must rely on the tools in their hands. The Garand became one of those tools that shaped outcomes quietly, repeatedly, and effectively. Today, when one hears that metallic ping, it is no longer a battlefield signal. It is an echo of history, of beaches and forests, of factories running through the night, of innovation meeting necessity. 8 rounds, steel and walnut, a design that changed infantry warfare. The masterpiece of John Garand did not simply win battles. It marked the beginning of a new era, one where the standard soldier carried firepower once reserved for specialists. And in doing so, it ensured that the legacy of the M1 would endure long after the smoke of World War II cleared.